All right, guys. So today I just want to look at some spacing in bricks. So someone on my YouTube channel asked me the question about how to keep consistent spacing between all of your elements. So that's your sections, your containers, your blocks. Keep it all consistent using bricks. And I've got to say, I've been a bit quiet the last few weeks. We've got construction going on around our place here. So it's been an absolute nightmare. But if you hear any power tools, I apologise in advance, but they're very likely to start up while I'm recording. So anyway, so what I want to look at is the way to keep all this consistent using CSS variables. And I'm going to do this without any additional plugins. So I would normally manage all of my CSS using a code manager. But I'm going to assume that you don't have any of that. So this is just straight out vanilla bricks with no add-ons whatsoever. And to do that, we're going to have to put some CSS somewhere. And for this demonstration, I've just decided to put it under the bricks settings custom code. Just stick it here. Now, it's not a CSS editor. It's just a text box. So I generally wouldn't use this, but this is exactly the same concept regardless of where you put these CSS variables. So anyway, let's start from the beginning. So what we want to see is, if I have a look at this in full screen, be on the front end, what we can see is that we've got a grey section at the top here. We've got some padding at the top, padding at the bottom. I've got a black section straight underneath, which is a copy of that. So you can see it's got the same padding top and bottom. And we can see between these two sections, the spacing at the bottom of the grey section and the top of the black section is identical. We've got some containers. So the containers which give us our box width for the page. I've created a grid inside that container and put two blocks in there and just duplicated that out. So we can see between these two containers, we've got some spacing, and also between the grid columns, we've got some spacing there. And then inside these blocks, we've got some padding for your spacing around there. And it's about all of these working together to be consistent. I'm going to show you the simple fixed way of doing it, and then I'm going to show you how to use clamp to do the same thing to make it responsive, which is, in my view, much nicer way of doing it. So let's start with clearing this out. So I'm going to get rid of what I've done here. So I'm going to clear this. So that's all of my content gone there. I'm also going to go into my themes, and I'm going to get rid of my theme. So I've got absolutely nothing set. So this is basically like having bricks fresh, just installed it. We've got no theme, we've got no settings, no content. All right, so it's starting from scratch. So the first thing we want to do is head over to our settings in bricks, or whatever code manager you're going to use. And we want to create some variables on the root element of your document. So :root for CSS means it's available to the entire document. If you put its class name there, so if we made that, for example, for a section, if we want our section or our content, this is only available, these variables are only available to anything below element that's got our content on it. So we want this to be available to the entire document. So we're going to put the root back there, and that makes it available everywhere. So we've also got some stuff down here which is commented out, which I'll come back to a little bit later, and that's the responsive stuff. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create some variables that actually make sense. Don't abbreviate just for the sake of abbreviation. Make your variables make sense. So when you come back in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, and you look at a variable in your content, you know what that is supposed to be. So if you put SP or SE-SP-B, what does that mean? That means SP-SP.DB, whatever. So make it make sense. Don't abbreviate for the sake of abbreviation. So what we've got here is a section space block being the top and bottom. Okay, section space inline, which is our left and right. And then we've got here, because we're not using the clamps, we want a variation on that. So I'm using the BEM thinking. So BEM, in BEM, the two dashes is a modifier. So we've got our section space block with a mobile modifier. So when we want this on mobile, we want that to be half the height. And for our inline mobile, we want that to be half that height as well. Half that width, I should say. So we've got some variables here with some variations on them for our sections. Okay, we then need to set this content space. What are we going to use for our default space around content? Now, here's an exception to my abbreviations because everyone knows what SML, XL, 2XL is, so we don't need to go back and think about that. But before that, we want to have content space, 2 dashes for our modifier, small, large, XL. You can have medium in there if you want to. All I'm doing is a calculation of point for the small is 0.5 times our content space. Large is 2 times our content space. XL, 3 times our content space. And that means that all you have to change, if you want to change all your content spaces, is this one variable here. And that changes every one of these variables. We then have some container space. That's the space between our containers. And I've just told this to be 4 times our content space. So that'll be, what's that, 4, that's 8 RAM, or 80 pixels. Okay, our container space. All right, so that's all there is to the variables that we need for spacing in simple terms. And I think the simpler you keep it, the easier it is to understand, the easier it is to use. Okay, so let's head to our page builder here. I'm just going to press the F5 key to make sure that we've just got completely blank bricks and it's loaded up these variables as we've set them there. And the first thing I'll do is create a theme. So we go to our theme styles and we're going to add a new theme. I'm just going to call this default. And the conditions, we're going to set the conditions to be the entire website. Okay. Now the only thing I'm going to set in here for now is the section. So we're only looking at spacing. So we go to our section and we want to set our padding top, bottom, left and right. So we link our opposite sides, go to our settings, and we want our section space block variable for our top and bottom. So I'm going to put in var brackets section space block. Okay. For the left and right, we want our section space inline. So we're going to do the same thing, var brackets section space inline. Now, here's one of the things that is a little bit weak in the Bricks UI. There are some add-ons like Maxim's Advanced Seamer, which make this easier. But here is where it gets a little bit tricky. What we need to do is go to the mobile view. And we can see here in a very light gray, it's telling us what that current setting is. What we need to do is now copy our mobile block variable. We need to put that on the top and bottom. Actually, I forgot the link, opposite sides. Just saves typing it twice. So we get our section space mobile with our, section space block with our mobile modifier. And we want the section space in line with our mobile modifier for the sides. And that is our section spacing done. Okay, so now if I add a section now, there goes my power tools, as I said, on cue. Lucky it's not the jackhammers, so you can still hear me. Okay, now when I add a section, you can see I've got spacing at the top, spacing at the bottom, and we're not quite at our viewport width here, so we've got a bit more spacing on the side than we would normally see. So I'm just going to grab that section, and I'm going to give it a color so we can see what it looks like. So I'm going to use our background and just select one of these default colors that I've set. So I'm just going to use this dark gray, and there's my section with padding at the top and the bottom and the sides, and that's coming from the theme. All right, so on our container, I'm going to make this a grid so we can see what we're looking at before. I'm going to go to my layout. My content, I'm going to make that a grid. And for our gap, I'm going to grab my content space. We can vary this a little bit later. So I'm going to grab my content space. And my gap, I'm going to do var content space. And for my grid template columns, I'm going to just do a simple 1FR, 1FR. I wouldn't normally do it this way. I won't explain this here. That's not what this is about. And you can see the representation in bricks here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some spacing around that container by using that same content space variable. So if we go to our style, our padding, we'll link all sides and put that in there. So now we've got some content space around the, and you can see the representation bricks, which is great. So it shows us we've got some space around that. And I wouldn't normally put space around my containers because I wouldn't normally have containers that are a different color to my section. but this is just to demonstrate what it actually looks like. So on the container, we're then going to put some background. So I'm going to pick this orange color for the background here. And then what we're going to do now is put a block inside that container. So our first block, we're going to set the background on that just so we can see it. Set that to white. And we're going to put our padding on that. Are we going to use at all sides? Yes. I'm going to use my content space small for the padding. Demonstrate it, we could just use the content space. Content space small, it's going to be in a variable. Content space small. Now what you'll see is when I put a heading and some basic text, why isn't that working? Bricks doesn't always do what it's meant to do here. So I'm going to do a heading. Now it works. And some basic text. And you can see I've got some padding around that now from my content space small. Now if I duplicate that block, I've now got two columns where my content space, which is between these items, is my grid gap, and my content space is my padding, which is around the items. If you want this gap to be bigger, let's say you got an image on the left, some text on the right, you don't have any of this color, you can use one of these ones. So use the content space large, for example. In fact, because we're using BEM modifiers, I don't have to remember all this. All I need to do is go to my container, go to my grid gap, and just put in a dash dash L. Now I've got a large content space. If I want that to be bigger, I can put dash dash XL, and I've got a larger space again. So you can see it's really cool by keeping all this naming the same and just using BEM modifiers and your standard small, medium, large, XL, XXL modifiers. It makes absolute sense. I'm just going to put that back to just content space for now. Okay, so it's just as it is. All right, now we're going to duplicate this container, and we see we've got no spacing between our containers. So to fix that, what we want to do is we look at our section. So the containers are inside a section, and we need to put some row gap between these containers. So if I go to my section here and then go back to our variables, I've got a variable I've called container space, which is 4 times the content space. So it's going to be quite large, 80 pixels. Let's go back here and go to our section. And on our row gap, we want to put var container space. Now we've got 80 pixel container space between our containers. Simple, right? Now, that's pretty much all there is to that. Now, if we duplicate this container, we see a problem. That is that because we got a section here and a section here that both got the same background, it looks like we got double the spacing between the two. So if we're going to have alternating sections, well, this happens a lot where you get white backgrounds on sections, right? And all the sections are background are white, and you go, why have I got such a big spacing between my content? And it's because you've got white space, and they're both the same. So if you're going to change that background, you don't have the problem. So if I made that background black, for example, I can clearly see where this section ends and that one starts, and they're equal padding. However, if you're not going to have this different colors, if they're the same color, what you need to do is on one of these sections, you need to go to your style, layout, and you need to set your top padding to 0. And now it all lines up properly. So we've got no padding at the top of this section here, so that we don't end up with double padding between the sections. Right, so that's pretty much how you manage that. Now, I did say I was going to show you how to make this responsive, because at the moment, what we've got is all fixed sizes. So if I use my mobile breakpoints here, if I move that around, it's all exactly the same as we go through our viewport widths, but we want to change that. We want to change that to be more responsive. Okay, so very simple. Okay, sorry guys, I had to stop this recording and come back to it. Just had too much construction noise going on around me, so I'm just going to revisit this. So we got to where we used fixed spacing between all of our elements, And what I'll look at is using clamps instead. So what we're going to do here is I've just commented out the fixed spacing and I've uncommented my clamps. So instead of using a 10 rem block, what I'm using is a clamp between 5 rem and 10 rem. And I've just used this website over here to create these clamp values. So between 600 pixels and 1440 with a base of 10 pixels. If I say I want my minimum to be 5, my maximum to be 10, that's my clamp rule there. Copy that, put that into my settings here, and there's my clamp. So I've replaced the section space block and inline with clamps. And I've also got an additional one here, which I'll show you shortly as well, where I'm getting a negative value of my inline clamp by just multiplying that with a calc times -1. I'll show you where I'm going to use that. This is a bit tricky. My content space is also a clamp, but that's between 1 rem and 2 rem at the maximum size. And then all of these others, the modifiers are exactly the same as they were above because they're just calculations based on that value, and the same with my container space. All right, so what changes here is we go back to the builder and did I just save that? Let me just hit the save button on that, make sure we saved it. Okay. So all we need to change here is when we come back to our home builder, go to my theme styles, and my section. Now that stays exactly the same. This stays exactly the same, but we get rid of the changes we put on the mobile because we don't need that. We're going to use the clamp value. So just get rid of the changes there and save that. Okay, now all of the other variables are exactly the same. So all I've changed is my clamp, my variables names here. I've just used clamps, and then the rest of it stays the same, and we get rid of our mobile modifier. So let me just go back to the builder and view that in front end, and there we go there. It looks pretty much the same as it did previously. However, let's have a look at what happens as we change the viewport. I'm going to put this on the side so you can see this a bit clearer. So what we're going to do is at 1405, we need to go a bit further. We need that to be 14, anything above 1440, so 1441. If we look at the section, for example, we've got 100 by 10, so 10 rem by 1 rem. As I drop below 1440, you watch these values here, they're changing. Okay, and then I get down to 600 pixels, and I've got 5 rem by 0.5 rem, which is exactly what we wanted. So you can see the spacing between our sections has changed, spacing between our content has changed, the padding around the content, the space between the containers has all changed, and that's just by changing from a fixed value to clamp values. Okay, so that's the cool way of doing it as far as I'm concerned. Instead of coming up with values at each breakpoint, just use a clamp, and it just makes sense, right? All of our padding changes. We want to use fixed values, just put fixed values in. All right, but I've got one more cool thing I'm going to show you here, which I haven't prepared, but let's go back to the builder. All right, so the last thing I'm going to show you is how to get a breakout image inside this section. So we've got a section here. If we look at that section, the inspector, we've got padding around that. So we've got the padding top, bottom, and left and right, but we want an image to go all the way to the edge of left and right and be inside that section. So we don't want to create a new section and set our paddings on it. We just want an image inside this section to go all the way to the edges. How do we do that? So let's have a look. Let's go to our section, and we're going to add in a image. Okay, there's our image there. It's going to drag it to the top here. We're going to set an image and pick a image here. Say, I don't know, these trees here. I'm going to set the full width, and I'm not going to set this to a figure just yet, so I'm going to show you a problem that occurs with this. What we want to do is we want to set the margin on this to be negative, and we want to set the width on it to be 100% of that width. So let's just try that first, and so I'll show you where it breaks. So if we grab our section space inline negative, so that's a calculation -1, so that's section space inline. So what we want to do is compensate for this padding on the left-hand side here. Go back to our image, and let's say we set the layout, and we go to our margin left, and we use var. This will show a problem. So margin negative, and we want to set the min width to 100 VW. There it is there. And what we see here is it doesn't actually quite work properly. So we've actually got, if we can see it very well there, we've actually got some extra padding on the right hand here, and the image is not quite going to the right, and it actually causes some weird overflow issues at times as well. So as we go there, it's fine. Get down to our mobile breakpoint, and it does all sorts of weird things, and that's because if we look at this section here, when we get down to above 767, I think it is, where are we? Just looking at the section here. Am I on the section? I am. Gotta go below 767. So we go down to there, and we see we change from flex no wrap to flex wrap. What that does is the image forms part of the flex calculation, and what it ends up doing is it just ends up not working as well as it should do. So you get some weird things happening here. As you get up here, see we've got some spacing there. I don't know if you can see it there that we shouldn't have. And that's because of the way flex works. So what we have to do is instead, we're going to get rid of these here. Get rid of those there. So we've got nothing on that image there. If we change that image to be a figure, which it should be anyway, because it's a positional element. So change that to a figure. We go to the style, CSS, on root, and then target the image. So now it's wrapped, the figure is actually wrapped inside a figure tag. So we'll show you that shortly. And then we set our min width to 100 VW. And we set our margin left, or margin inline start, I think it is. I'll try using the new thinking of that variable. So I'm going to move it across. Maybe it's not margin, I'll just do margin left. Margin left. There. Save. And let's have a look now. There we go. Now that works properly. I don't know if you can see that very well, but our image goes all the way from the left to the right. As we scale up, we've still got no padding on the right, so that actually works properly. And what's actually happened, actually weird, that's weird, it's not showing properly in Bricks. Let's actually just set the F5 button here. Bricks doesn't always update nowadays. I think it's part of the optimizations for the builder. It doesn't always update, and pressing F5, there we go. Now it works properly. So all I did was press F5 and now it displays properly. I'm finding this a lot with Bricks. So sometimes you change settings in the settings panel here. It doesn't look right in the editor. Save it, press the F5 key, and away it goes, and it works properly. I'm okay with that because Bricks is brilliant anyway. But here we go. We've got a image inside a section that's got left and right padding, and the image goes all the way from the left to the right. And if we look at the actual DOM, what we have here is under the section here, we've got a figure, and then we've got the image inside the figure. So what we're saying is that the figure is our positionable element for flex. So it's considering the figure. So if we actually roll over there, you can see the blue markings, and the actual image extends beyond that. So that's the figure. And then inside that, we're saying to the image to position it negative amount of padding we've got on the left and make it 100 VW as our minimum width. So that's the trick, is to put it inside a figure, which it should be anyway, and that makes it work properly. Okay, so that's it. So hopefully that makes sense. Actually, while I'm here, I'm going to just try that margin. Guys, here goes the construction again. This is what I'm living with. So I'm going to go margin, inline, start. Yep, and that works too. So it is the correct way to do it now. It's, instead of margin left, margin right, it's margin, inline, start. It just didn't update in the editor, which is what threw me. All right, I'm going to go now because the construction's just driving me mad, but hopefully this is something that makes sense to you. Thanks for listening.